The rain was the worst part. Not the fact that my parents drove away while I was taking a piss at some nowhere gas station off Highway 52. Not even the way my mom didn't look back through the rear window. It was the rain. I remember standing there, watching their blue sedan disappear into the distance, thinking they'd come back. Maybe they were just moving to a different pump. Maybe Dad forgot something inside. For the first hour, I made up stories. By the second hour, I was crying. By the fourth, I was shivering under the gas station's small overhang, and the attendant kept giving me suspicious looks through the bulletproof glass. "Kid, you been here all day?" he finally said through the speaker. "Where are your folks at?" I didn't know what to say. How do you explain that your parents just ... left? That they told you about visiting Grandma Felicity, made you pack your little suitcase, drove for 3 hours, and then abandoned you like a stray dog? The attendant, whose name tag read Cordell, let me stay in the bathroom that night. I curled up on the dirty tile floor, using paper towels as a pillow. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and I could hear 18-wheelers rumbling past all night. I kept thinking they'd come back. I kept checking the parking lot every few minutes. Day 2 was worse. The rain came down harder, and I had eaten nothing but the stale crackers Cordell had given me. I was getting dizzy, and my stomach felt like it was eating itself. That's when I saw this big trucker, this mountain of a man named Boaz, watching me from his cab. "Hey, little man," he called out. "You've been here since yesterday." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Where's your people?" "They're coming back," I lied. Boaz studied me for a long moment. He had kind eyes, the kind my dad never had. "When's the last time you ate something real?" I couldn't remember. That's how I ended up in Boaz's truck, driving to a children's shelter 3 towns over. He kept the radio low and didn't ask too many questions, just handed me a sandwich and told me it was going to be okay. I wanted to believe him. The shelter was this beige building that smelled like disinfectant and sadness. Mrs. Zelda, the intake worker, had gray hair and glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She asked me questions while filling out paperwork. Full name: Crispin Volkov. Age: 11. Just turned 11 last month. Parents' names: Darius and Marta Volkov. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Pity, not the kind you get when you scrape your knee, but the deep kind. The kind that says your life is fundamentally broken. It took them 3 days to track down my parents. 3 days of me sitting in that sterile room, convinced this was all some terrible mistake. When Mrs. Zelda finally came to talk to me, she looked tired. "We found them, honey." My heart jumped. "Are they coming to get me?" She sat down across from me, and I knew before she said anything. "Your mother." She said something. "Crispin?" "She said you weren't supposed to be born." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt something break inside my chest, something that had been cracked for years, finally splitting completely. All those times I'd tried to make them proud. All those times I'd wondered why they seemed to love my sister Veridiana more. Why they forgot my birthday 2 years running. Why they never came to my school plays. I wasn't supposed to be born Mrs. Zelda was still talking, something about placement and procedures, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about that moment at the gas station, about how my mom didn't look back, about how this had all been planned. They hadn't forgotten me. They had thrown me away. The Harrington Home for Children became my world for the next 7 years. It wasn't the worst place. I'd learn later that there were much worse places for unwanted kids. But it wasn't home either. Nothing would ever be home again. I shared a room with 3 other boys. There was Quillen, who'd been there since he was 6, and had this way of hoarding food under his mattress. Jackson never spoke above a whisper and flinched whenever someone raised their voice. And Lysander, who was 2 years older and had this dead look in his eyes that I'd later recognize in myself. The thing about being abandoned is that it changes your wiring. You become hyper-aware of every interaction, every slight change in tone, every shift in body language. You learn to read people because your survival depends on it. You learn to make yourself useful because useful things don't get thrown away. I became the kid who helped the younger ones with homework, the one who broke up fights, the one who cleaned up messes and never complained. Mrs. Harrington, the facility director, called me dependable. The other kids called me the fixer. School was my escape. I threw myself into studying the way some kids threw themselves into sports or video games. Math made sense. Science had rules. Literature showed me that other people had survived terrible things and found ways to tell their stories. My caseworker, a tired woman named Octavia, would update me on my case status every few months. There had been no contact from my parents. No letters, no phone calls, no Christmas cards. My sister Veridiana had been adopted by a family in another state. She was 4 years younger than me and had what the social workers called better placement potential. I understood what that meant. She was prettier, younger, and probably hadn't spent years absorbing the message that she wasn't supposed to exist. When I turned 16, I got my first real job washing dishes at a diner called Mel's Place. The owner, Gideon, was this gruff guy who'd done time and understood what it meant to need a second chance. He paid me under the table and let me work extra shifts. You got something most people don't, he told me one night as we closed up. You got hunger. Not the kind for food, but the kind for something better. He was right. I was hungry. To prove that I was worth something. To build a life that no one could take away from me. Hungry to show the world and maybe my parents that they had made a mistake. I saved every penny I could. While other kids bought video games or clothes, I bought books about business and finance. I read about people who had started with nothing and built empires. I studied their strategies, their failures, their comebacks. The night before I aged out of the system, Lysander found me on the roof of the group home. We'd made a habit of sneaking up there to smoke cigarettes and talk about our plans. "You really think you're gonna make it?" he asked. I looked out at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. "I have to. What if you don't?" I thought about that for a long moment. "Then I'll die trying." He laughed, but it wasn't funny. "You know what I think? Think you're gonna make it just to spite them. Your parents, I mean. You're gonna succeed just to prove they were wrong." Maybe he was right. Maybe spite was as good a motivation as any. The next morning, I walked out of the Harrington home with a duffel bag, $300, and a scholarship to the local community college. I was 18 years old and completely alone in the world, but I was free. Community college was where I met Professor Erasmus Whitmore, the man who would change my life without ever knowing it. He taught Introduction to Business, and he had this way of talking about entrepreneurship like it was both an art and a science. Business, he said on the first day, is about solving problems. The bigger the problem you solve, the more valuable you become. I was working 3 jobs to pay for school and rent on a studio apartment that was barely bigger than my old group home bedroom. Mornings at the diner, afternoons in classes, evenings stocking shelves at a grocery store, and weekends doing landscaping for a guy named Thorne who paid cash and didn't ask questions. I was exhausted all the time, but I was also alive in a way I'd never been before. Every small success felt enormous. Every paycheck was proof that I could survive without anyone's help. My first real business idea came from a problem I was living. College students were broke, but they needed textbooks. I started buying used books from graduating students for cheap and selling them to incoming students for less than the bookstore charged, but more than I'd paid. It was simple arbitrage, but it worked. Within 6 months, I had expanded to 3 community colleges in the area. I hired other students to scout for books and handle sales. By the end of my first year, I was making more from the book business than from all my other jobs combined, Professor Whitmore noticed. "You're thinking like an entrepreneur," he told me after class one day. "Have you considered transferring to a 4-year university?" I had considered it, but I'd also looked at the costs. "I can't afford it." "There are ways," he said. "Grants, scholarships, work-study programs. If you're serious about business, you need to think bigger." He was right. I applied to 6 universities and got accepted to 3. I chose the one that offered the best financial aid package and had the strongest business program. It meant leaving my textbook operation behind. But it also meant stepping into a bigger world. State University was like landing on another planet. Students my age were worried about fraternity parties and spring break trips. They complained about their parents not sending enough money. They had safety nets I couldn't imagine. I lived in the cheapest dorm available and ate ramen noodles for dinner most nights. While my classmates were networking at social events, I was working in the library until it closed. While they were sleeping off hangovers, I was studying. My sophomore year, I started a laundry service for busy students. My junior year, I launched a tutoring company that matched struggling students with academic high achievers. By senior year, I was running a small empire of student-focused businesses and had a bank account that would have seemed impossible when I was sleeping on gas station bathroom floors. But success brought its own problems. The better I did, the more I thought about my parents. Were they proud of me? Did they know what I'd accomplished? Did they ever regret what they'd done? I tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept creeping in. Late at night, when I was alone in my apartment, I'd catch myself wondering what Veridiana was like now. Did she remember me? Did she know what had happened? Graduation day was bittersweet. I watched other students celebrate with their families, taking pictures and making plans for celebration dinners. I sat alone in the auditorium, wearing a cap and gown I'd bought with my own money, thinking about how far I'd come. After the ceremony, I walked across campus one last time. I thought about the scared 18-year-old who'd arrived here for years earlier, about all the nights I'd gone to bed hungry, about all the times I'd wanted to quit. I'd made it. I'd proven that I was worth something. But I was still alone. That night, I made a decision. I was going to find my parents. Not to reconcile, not to forgive, but to show them what they'd thrown away. I was going to show them that the son who wasn't supposed to be born had become someone they could never ignore. Finding my parents was easier than I expected. They were still living in the same town, still in the same house where I'd spent the first 11 years of my life. Darius still worked at Meridian Manufacturing, the same mid-sized company where he'd been a floor supervisor for 20 years. Marta was working part-time at a dental office. I hired a private investigator named Kellen to gather information, not because I couldn't do it myself, but because I wanted to maintain distance. I wanted facts, not emotions. The facts painted a picture of a very ordinary life. They'd stayed married. They attended the same church. They'd never had any more children. Darius had received a few small promotions over the years, but nothing spectacular. They were living paycheck to paycheck, like most people. What struck me most was how unremarkable they were. In my mind, they'd become these larger-than-life figures. The parents who had abandoned me must have been monsters or masterminds. Instead, they were just ... small, ordinary people who had made an extraordinary, cruel decision. I used the information to fuel my next business venture. I'd noticed that small manufacturing companies were struggling with efficiency and inventory management. They needed technology solutions, but couldn't afford the big consulting firms. I founded Apex Solutions with 2 partners I'd met in graduate school. Marlo, a brilliant programmer who could build systems that seemed like magic, and Indira, who had a gift for understanding what clients actually needed versus what they said they needed. Our first major client was a company in the next state over. Then another. Within 2 years, we were working with manufacturing firms across the region. I was learning everything I could about the industry, about the challenges these companies faced, about their profit margins and pain points. And I was watching Meridian Manufacturing. They were struggling. Their equipment was outdated. Their processes were inefficient. Their workforce was aging. And they were losing younger employees to companies that offered better benefits and more opportunities for advancement. I could have approached them as a client, could have offered to help them modernize their systems, improve their efficiency, save their jobs. Instead, I waited and watched as their quarterly reports showed declining profits. I waited as they announced layoffs. I waited as their stock price dropped and their debt increased when they finally went up for sale. I was ready. The acquisition took 8 months to complete. There were other bidders, but I had advantages they didn't. I understood the industry. I had connections with their suppliers and customers. And I was willing to pay more than the company was probably worth. The day the sale was finalized, I stood in the parking lot of Meridian Manufacturing and looked at the building where my father had worked for 2 decades. He had no idea that his son, the one who wasn't supposed to be born, now owned the company that employed him. I could have fired him immediately, could have walked into his department and introduced myself, could have savored the shock on his face when he realized who I was. Instead, I waited. I wanted to understand the company first. I wanted to know who the good employees were, who the dead weight was, who deserved to stay, and who needed to go. I spent weeks walking through the facilities, talking to workers, reviewing personnel files. I learned that Darius Volkov was considered competent but unremarkable. He showed up on time, did his work, and went home. He wasn't particularly liked or disliked. He was just there, but he was also part of the old guard, the group of supervisors who had resisted modernization efforts and contributed to the company's decline. He was exactly the kind of employee the new Meridian Manufacturing couldn't afford to keep. 2 weeks after the acquisition was complete, I made my decision. I called the plant manager and gave him a list of employees who would be terminated. Darius Volkov was on that list. Any particular reason for these specific people? He asked. Inefficiency, I said. We're streamlining operations. What I didn't tell him was that I wanted the announcement to be made over the plant's loudspeaker system. I wanted everyone to hear it. I wanted it to be public and humiliating. The next day, I drove to the plant and parked across the street. At exactly 3:47 p.m., I heard the announcement echoing across the parking lot. Darius Volkov, please report to the main office. Your employment has been terminated effective immediately. I watched through my car window as he walked out of the building 20 minutes later, carrying a small cardboard box. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, smaller somehow. He stood in the parking lot for a long moment, as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened. Then he got in his car and drove away. The voice note came at 2:17 a.m., 48 hours after Darius was fired. I was in my home office, working on quarterly projections. My phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize, but I recognized the voice immediately. Please. My mother's voice cracked through the speaker. Please. I don't know who else to call. He's on the floor, shaking. What have you done? What have you done to him? There was sobbing, then the sound of the phone being dropped, then picked up again. He keeps saying the name Crispin. Keeps saying he found me. He found me. I don't understand. Please, if this is you, if this is really you, he's sick. He's really sick. Please call me back. I played the message 3 times, studying the desperation in her voice. Marta Volkov, the woman who had driven away from a gas station and left. Her 11-year-old son in the rain was begging me for help. I set the phone down and walked to my kitchen. I made coffee and sat at my dining table, looking out at the city lights. I thought about that scared kid in the shelter, about the words. Mrs. Zelda had spoken. He wasn't supposed to be born. Now my father was on the floor, shaking. Now my mother was calling me 23 years too late. I didn't call back. The next day, I received a call from Kellen, my private investigator. Your father was admitted to the hospital last night, he reported. Panic attack, possible heart palpitations. He's stable, but they're keeping him for observation. Any visitors? Just your mother. She's been there all night. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called my assistant and told her to clear my schedule. I had somewhere to go. The hospital was 15 minutes from my office. I'd driven past it hundreds of times, but never gone inside. I found visitor parking and walked through the automatic doors, past the gift shop and the cafeteria. Following the signs to the cardiac wing, I found my mother in the waiting area, slumped in a plastic chair. She looked exhausted, older than her 58 years. Her hair was gray now, streaked with white, and she had deep lines around her eyes. I stood there for a long moment, watching her. She was staring at the floor, occasionally checking her phone. She looked small and defeated. Marta, I said. She looked up, and I watched her face change as recognition dawned. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and her hand flew to her chest. Crispin, she whispered. Hello, Mom. She stood up shakily, reaching toward me, then stopping. You're so tall. You look ... double quotes, like a man who wasn't supposed to be born. The words hit her like a physical blow. She sat back down heavily. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. I was young. I was stupid. I was ... You were what? Confused, overwhelmed, having a bad day? She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. We couldn't handle it. We couldn't handle you. You were so smart, so intense, so ... much. And your father, he was drinking then, and I was working 2 jobs, and we just ... You just what? Decided. I was disposable. We thought someone else could give you a better life. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. By abandoning me at a gas station? By leaving me in the rain for 2 days? We thought someone would find you quickly. We thought ... You thought wrong. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. I know we were wrong. I've regretted it every day since. Every single day. But not enough to come find me. Not enough to make it right. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. We tried to find you. We called the shelter, but they said you'd been placed with a family. We thought you were happy. We thought you were better off. I was never placed with a family. I aged out of the system. I've been alone since I was 18. The words seemed to break something in her. She doubled over, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I'm dying, she finally managed to say. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. And your father? He's been having panic attacks since he got fired. He keeps saying someone is watching him, someone is coming for him. He figured out it was you somehow. He figured out you bought the company. I stood there, looking down at this broken woman who had given birth to me and then thrown me away. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger. Just emptiness. What do you want from me? I asked. Forgiveness, she whispered. A chance. To explain, a chance to make it right. It's too late for that. Please, she said. I'm dying. He's dying. We're both dying. I turned to walk away, then stopped. Room number? What? His room number. I want to see him. Room 314 was quiet, except for the beeping of monitors. Darius Volkov lay in the hospital bed, looking smaller than I remembered. His hair was completely gray now, and his skin had a yellowish tint that spoke of poor health and hard living. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. When I walked in, he turned his head slowly toward me. "Crispin," he said. It wasn't a question. I pulled up a chair beside his bed. "Hello, Dad." He studied my face for a long moment. "You look successful." "I am." "You bought the company." "I did." He nodded slowly. "I always wondered if you'd come back. I always wondered if you'd survived." "Did you hope I had?" He was quiet for a long time. "I hoped you had, but I also hoped you'd forgotten us." "I never forgot." "I know. That's why you fired me." I expected him to be angry, to rage at me for destroying his life. Instead, he just looked tired. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" He closed his eyes. "Because I was weak. Because I was scared. Because I was 26 years old and already felt like I'd failed at everything." "So you failed at being a father too?" "Yes." At least he was honest. "You want to know something?" he said. "I used to drive by that gas station sometimes, 4 years after. I'd pull into the parking lot and sit there, wondering if you were okay. Wondering if we'd done the right thing. And what conclusion did you reach?" "That there was no right thing. That we'd broken something that couldn't be fixed." I sat there in the quiet hospital room, looking at this man who had helped create me and then abandoned me. I thought about all the years I'd spent hating him, all the energy I'd poured into proving him wrong. "I don't forgive you," I said finally. He nodded. "I wouldn't expect you to, but I don't hate you anymore either." He looked surprised. "Hating you was exhausting," I explained. "It was like carrying around a heavy weight everywhere." I went. "I'm tired of carrying it. What happens now?" I thought about that. Now I go back to my life. I run my companies. I employ people and solve problems and build things. I do all the things that prove I was supposed to be born and us. You'll die knowing that the son you threw away became more successful than you ever were. That might be punishment enough." He was quiet for a long moment. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What? Are you happy?" Success isn't the same thing as happiness. I thought about my life, my companies, my money, my achievements. I thought about my empty apartment, my lack of close relationships, my inability to trust anyone completely. "I'm working on it," I said. "Good. That's good." I stood up to leave, then paused. "Darius?" "Yeah, I'm glad you're not dead. I'm glad you got to see what I became." He smiled sadly. "Me too, son." "Me too." I walked out of the hospital into the bright afternoon sunlight. In the parking lot, I called my assistant. "I want to set up a scholarship fund," I told her, "for kids aging out of the foster system. Full ride to any college they can get into. What should we call it?" I thought about Boaz, the trucker who had saved me. About Mrs. Zelda, who had shown me kindness when I needed it most. About Professor Whitmore, who had believed in me. About all the people who had helped me become who I was supposed to be. "The Second Chance Foundation," I said. 3 months later, I got a call from the hospital. Darius had died in his sleep. There was no funeral, just a small memorial service that I didn't attend. Marta sent me a letter afterward, thanking me for giving her those few minutes to see her son again. I never wrote back, but I kept funding the scholarship program. Every year, I meet with the recipients' kids who have survived the system, who have learned to depend on themselves, who understand that sometimes you have to build your own family. I tell them what I learned, that being abandoned doesn't mean you're worthless, that surviving doesn't make you bitter unless you let it, that success is the best revenge, but happiness is the best life. Last month, I got a letter from a girl named Raven who had received one of our scholarships. She'd graduated from medical school and was starting her residency. She wanted to thank me for making her dreams possible. "You saved my life," she wrote. "Not just financially, but by showing me that someone who started with nothing could become something." I kept that letter. It sits on my desk next to a picture of the gas station where my life really began. Not because I want to remember that abandonment, but because I want to remember the moment I learned I could survive anything. I was supposed to be born. I was supposed to survive. I was supposed to become exactly who I am. And for the first time in my life, I'm happy about that.